All right, we're finally back with another video and another story, just as we promised. You remember what we're talking about?
Things with stuff.
Things with stuff. Yes, exactly. This is the one you requested. We're talking about Basil Derry. Who's Basil Derry?
Mm.
You don't know? We just talked about this before I started the video.
You were saying something about dairy and cows or something like that.
I didn't say dairy cows. Basil Derry, Derry.
Uh,
Is it Derry? Yes. Okay. Well, this story is called An Old Style Honeymoon. The following story comes to us from Gainesville, New York. Many of our readers will remember Derry and his wife. For further information concerning them, we refer you to J. Gates Hartman and A.W. Stott, who knew them well. And I'm just reading from the memory that is recorded on Family Search. So this was recorded in the Genius of Liberty newspaper, Uniontown, Pennsylvania, in 1891. Of all the men I need to hunt with when the Pennsylvania woods were filled with game, not one is alive, and they were all younger than me except one. Basil Derry of the Laurel Hill Mountains, way down in Fayette County, said the veteran Earl Parmley of Gaines Corners. Mr. Parmley is nearly 93 years of age, and undoubtedly is the oldest hunter in the state. Although he does very little hunting now, not because I'm too old, he says, but because there isn't game enough to make it worthwhile. Basil Derry was 7 years older than I, continued the old hunter, and he's been dead 10 years. He was a great hunter. He had bought a small piece of land on the Laurel Mountain as early as 1812, and there married a girl named Mary Schultz, a member of the same stock that rock-ribbed old Governor Schultz come from. The day they were married, they started afoot through the woods on their wedding tour to their new home in the mountains. You're making too much noise there.
Sorry. New home in the mountains.
You gotta have a snack?
This is the first time. Just go.
I thought we were supposed to have popcorn for a video.
Just read.
Just read. Basil carried his rifle and on his way to killed 15 wild turkeys, 5 deer, a bear, and 2 wildcats. The bear and the wildcats Basil and his wife hung up in the woods out of reach of wolves. He shouldered 2 of the deer and 6 of the turkeys, and his wife loaded herself on the 9 remaining turkeys and carried them to their home. Some of the burden had to be carried 20 miles. The business Basil was going to engage in on the mountain was charcoal burning for the furnaces at Haydentown. He sold the deer and turkeys he killed on his wedding trip for enough money almost to pay for his cabin. The bear and wildcats his wife and himself went back and carried in after they got their other game came home. They had to take a tramp of 10 miles to do it and then got back before dark. This was in early part of March 1812. A few days after Basil and his wife, he was only 20 and she was 17, got settled in the wilderness on the Laurel Mountain, Basil gathered in a packload of wild turkeys. He started with them to Haydentown and on his way in killed a bear. He sold his turkeys and bearskin, having left the bear's carcass in the woods, and was about to start back home when he was solicited to stay and fiddle for a dance that was to be given in Haydentown that night. Basil being a good natural fiddler, he didn't want to leave his wife alone in the cabin, miles from any place, although he knew she could take care of herself, but the snug purse they offered to make up for him he needed, and so he agreed to stay and fiddle. He left for home at daylight, and when he got home, he found that Mary had been sitting up all night shooting wolves from a loophole in the cabin, around which they had been howling all night. The snow was strewn with dead wolves, and the young wife told Basil she was glad he had stayed at Haydentown and earned the money. When out hunting, Derry always wore moccasins made by himself out of a groundhog skin. He made his way through the woods on those as noiselessly as a shadow. He had 2 guns, both flintlocks, and he never changed them to percussion locks when those were invented. He said the old flintlocks had always stood by him, and he intended to stand by them. He called his guns Burnt Eye and Black Snake. Black Snake he always kept home for his wife for emergencies. In case no emergency arose, she frequently started out herself in the woods to raise one. She seldomly came home without a turkey or two, perhaps a deer, and likely as not, a bear. One time after they had lived in the mountain a year or two, he wounded a big buck late in the afternoon. Or wounded a big buck late in the afternoon. Wounded? What am I reading? One of the buck's forelegs was broken by the shot. Basil did not follow the deer then, but returned home, ate his supper, and told his wife he was going back to run down the deer. All right, she said, I'll go with you. Taking a couple of dogs, which they led Basil and his wife starting for the clearing where he had wounded the buck. Arriving there, they waited and listened. They heard deer after deer pass them in the darkness, by their footfalls on the dry leaves, but the quick ear of Basil could tell that none of them was his wounded buck. By and by, a deer came along through the woods, and by its gait, Basil knew that it was the wounded buck. The dogs were turned loose. Down the steep ascent the deer went, the dogs after him. Basil ran after the dogs, and his wife kept easily at his side. They ran nearly 2 miles, and then came out suddenly in an open space, lighted brightly by the moon. In the moonlight, Basil saw that one of his dogs had caught the deer and was holding it by one of its hind legs. He shot it. Aided by his wife, he dressed and skinned it. They were at least 7 miles from home, and it was late. Basil built a fire. His wife cooked some of the venison. She ate a hearty meal and lay down on the bare ground and slept soundly until morning, although it was late in November. How was that for a young married couple? For 67 years, Basil Derry followed the life of a hunter and backwoods farmer, and the many grand hunts I've had with him make me feel good to think of. He never had his superior as a woodsman. He was a native of Loudoun County, Virginia, and was a son of Molly Derry, the fortune-teller of the Revolution. Derry died in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, and his wife was still living in 1883, hale, sound, and hearty. How's that for a story? You didn't even laugh. I love that story. It's fun. What a honeymoon. And what a life they lived together in the backwoods. How would you like to live in the backwoods of Pennsylvania like that? No? You like the city life, don't you? Your computers and phones and games. Comfortable shoes. Yeah. But times were different back then, and you did what you needed to do. Well, at the end of that story, it kind of gave away what I'm going to talk about next time. And we're going to talk about Molly Derry, the fortune teller of the Revolution, and the witch of the backwoods of Pennsylvania. If I can talk. Okay. Well, should we say goodbye for now?
Sure.
Sure. Is there anything you want to say about this story?
Mysterious.
Burnt eye, and what was the other name of the gun?
Snake thingamabob.
Black snake. Yeah.
What's the fortune teller of the what now?
The fortune teller of the Revolution.
It'll
Molly
explain itself,
Derry.
the story.
We'll talk about it all next week. Okay? Before Halloween, because she was a witch. And there are some spooky stories around her. So, till next time, we'll see you later.